Creality CR-10 is a Chinese 3D printer that's been making waves in the 3D printing community recently, thanks to its relatively low price, large build volume, and high-quality prints. I've been wanting a second printer for a while now, partially because having two printers can be useful when even short prints can take many hours to complete, but beyond that, I wanted something that was capable of printing larger models. With its build volume of 300 by 300 by 400 millimeters, or 12 by 12 by 16 inches, the CR-10 seemed to fit the bill, but is it really all it's cracked up to be? Let's take a closer look. Now, before I begin, I should mention that I paid for this printer with my own money. However, GearBest did get in touch with me and offered to supply my viewers with a discount code for this printer, as well as some affiliate links. So if you use one of those links to buy the printer at GearBest, a small amount will go back to the channel. So the printer comes in several large pieces. This is the base with the print bed on it. And you do have to attach them to each other with some screws, and also plug in some wires from the control box, which adds a little bit of difficulty, but this is not a printer kit, in my opinion. Many printer kits require that you literally assemble everything, including doing some soldering in some cases, so the level of difficulty here is really quite low. Now, it comes with quite a number of accessories, including all the tools you need to put it together, and a little roll of sample filament, a memory card, and so forth. It's actually pretty nice that they give you all that stuff. Next up, we have the control box, which is sort of the brain of the printer. It's connected to the printer with a bunch of wires, as you see here, and you control it with this knob. We'll show more about that in a little bit. Finally, we have the gantry, which is the vertically oriented part of the printer that has the hot end, or the print head, on it. It took me about half an hour to put the printer together, which is a lot more than was really necessary, but I was going very slow and referencing a video by Tiny Machines, which tells you everything you need to do to put it together, and in fact I'll put that in the video description. So here we have the printer all assembled, and I had to actually get a cheap IKEA coffee table to put it on, because it is quite large, and that's one thing you want to consider when you're buying this, is where are you going to put it? It has the separate control box and a very large print area, so it's not like you can just tuck it in somewhere like you might be able to with smaller printers. The body of the printer is made up of aluminum bars that have these kind of rubbery strips inserted in them for just cosmetic reasons, as far as I know. They can be either blue or orange, depending on the model of printer you order. And this was actually one of the only problems I had when assembling the printer, was that my strips had been improperly cut, and they were actually obscuring the holes where I was supposed to be screwing the gantry to the base. So that's one thing to keep in mind. I just cut them off and put them back. Although you can print by connecting this directly to your computer by USB, most people use the SD card. It's a micro SD card that goes in this slot here, and it can be a little difficult to put in and out. I would actually recommend getting an extender cable that converts this into a regular SD card slot, because this tiny card is difficult to use, and I understand that the connector is a little fragile too. Speaking of the SD card, one of the files on there is a sample model that you can print of a cat, and many people choose that as their first test print, but unfortunately for many people's CR-10s that's actually corrupt and it won't print properly. I stopped the print when it got to this point, but what it tries to do is print the head way forward, and it basically off the body, and it won't work that way, obviously. It's kind of become a rite of passage for CR-10 owners to print this, so that's why I tried to do it, even though I knew it was probably going to be corrupt. People have taken to calling this the Decapicat. But, yeah, it's not a bad model, actually. They have on the CR-10 Facebook page the correct, non-corrupt model, which is this, and it prints really nice, actually, and it's not a bad demonstration when it actually has a head. Still, I think it's kind of funny, and it's become kind of a mascot for the CR-10 to some degree. Someone even made a firmware hack, I guess you'd call it, for the printer that causes the Decapicat to display on your screen. So here is the main screen. This is the main info screen that tells you all sorts of things about what's happening with the printer. You use this knob to select various items on the screen, as I'm doing here. It's functional, and it allows you to do a number of things that some printers don't allow you to do, like make changes during the print of how fast it's printing or the temperature and things of that nature. but it can be a little clunky when you're trying to do certain things like raise or lower the Z-axis. Can take like 6 clicks just to get to the proper menu, but it works well enough. The fan in the control box is on the noisy side, so this is going to be a little bit disruptive if you have this in a living area, I think, although it's not an annoying noise, it's just kind of loud. This is what it sounds like right next to the control box. So the bed is a heated bed, and it comes with this glass sheet on it, attached with some binder clips. I have mine arranged the way they are here just so that they won't collide with the print head as it goes across here. Now, some people have noticed that their glass beds are actually kind of bowed in the middle, so they're not completely flat, which can be a problem if you're trying to level your bed. I found that was the case in mine. It was a little bit lower in the middle there, but I flipped it over and the other side was better. So, you know, other people have found that mirror tiles that you can get at places like Lowe's or Home Depot actually work pretty well to print on, or other people also use various other print surfaces. I actually just use the glass with a little bit of glue stick on it for some insurance. It seems to work quite well as long as you have your bed properly leveled. Now that is a bit of a problem, leveling this bed. There's no auto leveling. I have added these sort of wagon wheel adjusters that I printed that help adjust the bed because the included knobs are a little bit difficult to use and they hurt your hand a little bit. I think with any printer that doesn't have auto bed leveling, getting the bed level is the #1 issue that people face. I also added this printed strain relief bracket that is supposed to help prevent the wires going into the heat bed from being damaged just from the motion going back and forth there. But in terms of modifications, that's all I've done. So when you're loading filament, you just put it on the attached spool holder, which I have actually facing the opposite direction from what they seem to recommend because it was a little too close to the cables for my liking. And you put it in the extruder here. The filament does get really close to this rod for the Z-axis, and some people have printed filament guides that sort of keep it away from the rod. I haven't found it to be an issue as of yet. And it goes in really far because it's got a Bowden tube, which is just a sort of tube that guides it to the hot end. Once you've ensured that the plastic is flowing freely, you can go ahead and select your print from the menu system. The printer actually comes with a copy of Cura on its SD card, but I'm using Simplify 3D because I already have it, and I think it probably gives a bit better results, so just keep that in mind as you look at what I've produced later on in the video. While you're printing, this info screen gives you a variety of information about your print, such as the bed temperature and the nozzle temperature, the fan speed and elapsed time, things of that nature. If you're starting from a cold printer, the bed can take around 6 minutes to totally heat up, and the nozzle doesn't take very long at all, maybe a minute or two. And once it's gotten to temperature, it will start printing. Now, there's one thing I want to point out first of all that may not be obvious to everyone. This printer is capable of printing quite large objects, as you will see. However, it's not really any faster than any other printer, which means that if you want to do a large print, it's going to take quite a while. It's not uncommon for prints on the CR-10 to take multiple days, especially if you want them to be quite large. Now, this one I'm printing here is a very small model, as you can probably tell, and this will just take a matter of minutes. And here we are back a little bit later. This print took about 50 minutes to complete, and then I've let the bed cool off and turned the printer off as well, so it should be nice and cold, and it should pop off the bed without any problem, as it does. Now if we look here, this was printed at a relatively rough setting as 0.32 millimeter layer height, so you can see some of the layers there, but I wanted something that would print relatively quickly. Despite the visible layers, it looks very good. This is not the most detailed model in the world, but I think it's a nice quick print just to test that everything's working right. But of course I didn't buy the CR-10 to be making tiny little models like this, oh no. I wanted to do something a bit bigger. In fact, I decided to print this same model at the same size as the original ceramic figure that it was based on, and I scanned to make the 3D model. So let me just show you that now. Oh. We're going to have to pull back just a little bit. There we are. So this is printed at the same 0.32 layer height, and it took roughly 18 hours, as I recall, which, depending on how much you know about 3D printing, may seem like a lot or a little. For a model this large, that's actually pretty fast, and one reason for that is that it's hollow inside. There's no infill in there at all, but it prints perfectly even without any infill or supports, which is why I kind of like this model. And if we look at the bottom of the model as well, you can see, because we're printing on glass, it's really quite smooth. It's almost mirror finish there. Of course, you have to get your bed nice and level to get that kind of finish, but it came out really well. And for my first large print, I think this was a big success. For my next print, I asked my son what we should make, and he said we should make a bender bank like the 3D printing nerd did. So that's what I did, and here it is. Oh, we're going to have to move back yet again. So when Joel, the 3D printing nerd, made his model, he just made the normal hollow model and then cut a hole in it, or a slot in it, in the back with a Dremel tool. I decided to try and alter the actual 3D model to make it into a bank, so I added a slot in the back, as you can see here, and also a sort of plug in the bottom with some screw threads, so you can actually get the money out if you want to. This came out pretty well. Any imperfections you may see in the surface here are actually part of the model itself. It's been blown up quite a bit bigger than it was originally intended for, so you can see, if you look closely at the surface, some faceting and things of that nature. But overall, especially if you look at it from a reasonable distance, I think it looks quite good. I did, however, have one problem. In an effort to keep the cables in the back from getting all tangled up in the bed as it moves, I had zip-tied some of them together, and it ended up that one of the cables didn't have enough play in it, and it kind of got caught, and it ended up causing this issue here where there was a couple of missed layers, and it printed fine even after that, but I was able to just pop it right off. So that was actually my fault, I guess. Next up, I printed these low poly Star Wars models from Flowalistic. Now, I've printed these before, but I did it at their normal size, which is about 5 or 6 inches tall for C-3PO. This one, however, is quite a bit larger. I believe C-3PO here is roughly 17 or 18 inches tall, and that's actually bigger than you can print with this printer, but that's because you print the head and arms separately. I printed this at 0.32 layer height, so a rough setting, and just had, I think, something like 5% infill, just enough to help it print, but you really don't need much in there at all. I believe C-3PO took about 18 or 20 hours to print, while R2-D2 was considerably longer because of his massive body. It took around 36 hours, I believe. These both turned out quite well, with only some very minor issues. I would say on C-3PO it's particularly noticeable, but there is a kind of ringing effect, or an echo effect, that you sometimes see on 3D prints. So if you look at his knee, for example, you have a vertical line here, and then if you look closely, there's some ghost lines sort of next to it there. And the same goes for the kind of diagonal lines here. And that's, it's not unique to this printer at all. And it can be helped by printing slower, I understand. To this degree, I really don't care that much about it. It's not an issue for me. And frankly, when prints take this long already to complete, I don't really want to slow it down much more. So I'm not overly concerned about that. There was one issue I had with R2-D2, however, that's a little bit more concerning, and that is, you can see on his leg here, there's a little line similar to what we had with Bender, although not as severe, so it didn't fall apart. And that line continues on to the other parts, which we're all printing at the same time. So you can see there's a line on the body here, and there's also one on the other leg, which is actually printing with that side on the bed, so you can't really see it very well. But I don't really know what causes this issue, aside from the possible cable tangle, as I mentioned before. That was definitely the problem with Bender. Could be a filament issue getting tangled slightly. In any case, it hasn't happened since then, so I'm just sort of keeping an eye on it. Simple models like this are fun, and they print relatively quickly for their size, but I did want to try one other type of model, and that is more of a sculptural model. This is a model, or a bust, of Luke Skywalker by Toshi TNE on Thingiverse. And first of all, let me just say that this is a fantastic model. This may be the best sculpture of Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker I've ever seen. And it prints pretty easily. I did use a kind of filament that's a bit glossy, as you can see, which may not have been the best choice for this particular thing, but it came out really quite well with minimal supports. And yeah, I mean, nice smooth surfaces, good detail. I'm quite happy with this. Just for fun, I decided to see how long it would take to print one of these that would fill up the entire build area of the CR-10, and it was going to take, I think, over a week. So yeah, I won't be doing that, but overall, very good. This was printed at 0.12, I believe, layer height. So for this review, I wanted to try one more thing that would really take advantage of the full size of this printer, and I came back to this model, which is the Millennium Falcon, or Millennium Falcon as they call it on Thingiverse. And this is not the one that I printed on this machine. This was printed on my previous printer, and this is actually as large as I could print it on that printer because it stands up like this on its end and prints just right up from the bottom with no supports or anything. A very cleverly engineered model. But this, as I say, was as big as I could make it, which is not really all that big. But with the CR-10, it was a different story. And here it is. I printed this at, I believe, 200% of the original model. The one that I was holding earlier is actually smaller than the original model because I couldn't print it any larger. This is roughly 15 inches tall, I think. And I could have gone slightly larger if I wanted to, but I don't like to go right up against the maximum build volume just in case there's some issues of some sort. But yeah, it printed very well. You can see the difference in size, if I put this next to the new one, is quite considerable. As I say, it printed up like this on its end. I put it this way, oriented on the build platform, because I was afraid that as the bed moved back and forth like that, it would kind of possibly tip over if it was facing the other way and kind of started to wiggle a little bit. I also used a raft to help secure it to the bed platform. A lot of people, or at least some people on Thingiverse, have complained that this can tip over when you're printing it, so it's something to be aware of. Overall, this came out extremely well. Nearly flawless, actually. And this is by far the largest thing that I've ever printed, and it's also the thing that took the longest to print. It was about 78 hours, or more than 3 days of continuous printing. And I was crossing my fingers the entire time, hoping that nothing would go wrong and that it wouldn't tip over or otherwise fail, and it didn't. It printed really well. We can look at some of the details a little bit more closely. This was printed at 0.24 layer height, so it's sort of a medium quality, but it came out quite well for the most part. They're very smooth. You can see there's actually little seats inside the cockpit. You can see that there's hollow areas in the middle there where the guns are. He actually has a couple of, or several different versions of this. You can have the landing gear up or down. I chose down just, so I could have this displayed on a flat surface if I wanted to. And you can also choose from the old or new style satellite dish there. I, of course, chose the classic version. So this came out extremely well, as I said, and I'm really quite happy with it. There was one minor quality issue, and that is, if you look down here, you can see that the sort of flat panels are nice and flat and smooth. I mean, there's some layer lines there, but nothing really to notice. But when you get up here, you can see there's some banding going across, and I'm not entirely sure what's causing that, but my hunch is that because it gets so high up, and also maybe because this is kind of a thin model, that just a slight lack of rigidity in the frame can lead to some slight wiggling maybe as you get higher up in the build volume. So it's something to keep in mind, although it didn't really seem to affect the other ones that went high up like this. So I don't really know how to explain this issue. So what's the final verdict on the CR-10? I think it's a great printer. Its prints are high quality and much larger than you can print with any printer that's anywhere near its price range. But there are a few things to consider before you buy one. Unless you buy from one of the few sellers in the US, which means you'll be paying quite a bit more, you'll be buying direct from China, and that can mean that it can take a while to arrive and can also make getting customer service or repairs difficult, but not impossible. Luckily, there is a huge online community of CR-10 users on places like the CR-10 Facebook group, so you're not alone if you have a problem. The other thing to consider is that Creality has recently released an upgraded version of this printer called the CR-10S that has some upgrades like dual Z-axis lead screws, which should help with the frame rigidity issue I mentioned. However, it is more expensive than the regular CR-10 and also available at fewer places. If you want this to be your first 3D printer, you will need to do your homework and also be prepared to possibly make some modifications or repairs yourself. If this sounds intimidating, you might be better off getting a printer that doesn't require assembly and that has good customer support. The other concern I have is how this printer will fare over the long term, since most people have only had it for a few months, and I guess we'll find out as time goes by. In any case, I'm very happy with the CR-10, and I have no regrets after buying it from GearBest. As I mentioned earlier, there are some links and coupon codes in the video description, so if you do decide to get one from GearBest, you can use the links below, and it would really help the channel out. I look forward to using this printer some more in the future, including to print parts of my R2-D2 project that I wasn't able to fit on my previous printer. Are you thinking of getting a CR-10, or do you have one already? Let me know in the comments, and thanks very much for watching.